Let us look quickly at the agenda for today so that we can all see what is expecting us in this hour and a half. We will start with introductory remarks from Dr. Dimitri Sanga, Director of the UNESCO Regional Office in Dakar. I will then briefly introduce talent, what is talent for those that do not know, the idea of talent and the aim of this learning series. We will then go straight into the core of the topic with Dr. Esther Kerr, that will introduce the concept of 21st century skills and talk about the main frameworks developed over the last 3 decades on these skills. Afterwards, we will have 2 examples of integration of skills from sub-Saharan African countries. We will look at the case of Senegal, exposed by Mr. Sheikh Nallam, and at the case of the Gambia by Mr. Momodou Dieng. I will get back to introduce both speakers later on the webinar. Afterwards, we'll go back to Dr. Kerr, and Dr. Kerr will highlight some common findings coming out from a multi-country study that took place in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa over the past 3 years. And we will finally have, as I said before, some time for question and answers and a few closing remarks. But let us just start and not lose too much time with the introduction. I am glad to introduce to all of you Dr. Dimitri Sanga, Regional Director of UNESCO Dakar, who will officially open this learning series. Mr. Director, over to you.
Thank you, Davide. Mesdames et messieurs, chers participants.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, it is with great pleasure that I am taking the floor today in the capacity as Director of UNESCO's Multi-Sectoral Regional Bureau for the Sahel region in Africa that hosts the Talent Secretariat. As stated in the introduction of the recently published study on assessing skills for the 21st century, the Education Agenda 2030 and the SDG4 call on governments to enhance the quality of education and equip all learners equally with the relevant skills that will help them thrive in today's and tomorrow's world. This learning series, which takes place today thanks to the collaboration between Talent, UNESCO Dakar Office, and the UNESCO's International Institute of Education Planning, and thanks to funding from the Global Partnership for Education, aims to strengthen participants' knowledge on this topic by looking at the issue of integrating 21st century skills into the education systems of sub-Saharan Africa. I would officially like to launch this series by addressing 4 main topics that are related to the importance of 21st century skills. The first theme is the question of understanding these 21st century skills. As you know, we expect teachers who teach science to have specific knowledge in science as well as in mathematics and all other curricular subjects. Therefore, we need to make sure that teachers have the opportunity to learn more about these skills, rather than expecting that we know how to teach and assess them without proper training and preparation. Now, to do this, it is important that educators give serious thought to the question of integrating these skills and ensure that there is a proper alignment between learning objectives, assessment, and teacher training. And this becomes a priority for integrating 21st century skills into education systems. The second is about linking global frameworks with local solutions based on the needs and reality of the educational context. In this sense, the study called Measuring 21st Century Skills analysis of assessments in selected sub-Saharan African countries should serve as an inspiration as much as the optimizing assessment for all initiative implemented by UNESCO and the Brookings institution in 3 sub-Saharan African countries. The initiative and the study clearly show as how national managers and teachers, starting from global definitions, have managed to develop national approaches to integrate these skills into classroom practices by using existing tools. As learning is more visible in the classroom itself, it is important to work at the local level and integrate perspectives of all stakeholders, including teachers, students, in order to create models that are completely in line with the classroom reality and with the national education vision. But at the same time, we also need these models to be co-built with all stakeholders. The third concerns the sharing and use of knowledge, as this is an area where different approaches have been used to integrate these skills into the education systems. Global and regional experience must be leveraged to improve and adjust the adaptation at national level. Collaboration, exchange, and pooling of experience are critical in order to ensure proper understanding of the way 21st century skills can be acquired while focusing on tackling the current learning crisis. These values are also at the heart of the mission of the UN and of the SDGs, and it is even more important to consider them today in this global crisis that is threatening our society. The fourth and the last point I'd like to share with you is the present and the future. We are all witnessing the fact that the world of today and tomorrow may be very different from the one we know. The impact of the current pandemic is forcing governments to change the way they deliver education. The content of education and the skills that today's children will need tomorrow must be carefully studied. The UN guidance note on the impact of COVID-19 on children reminds us of the need to take into account the broader perspective of children's lives. Skills such as collaboration, problem solving, communication, which are increasingly gaining ground in our societies, must be taken into account in the kind of education we want for our children for today and tomorrow. With these 4 points firmly anchored in my mind, I thank you once again for your interest in this crucial aspect of the education system. And I would like to wish you a good webinar, and I officially inaugurate this learning series. Thank you so much for your kind attention. David, you've got the floor. Thank you so much, Mr. Director.
To English. As I was saying, I thank you very much, Dr. Sanga, for these inspiring and well-wishing words. And let me join him in expressing my gratitude to UNESCO IAEP for collaborating with UNESCO Dakar and with Talent on this initiative. And also thank the Global Partnership for Education, who made this learning series possible. Finally, another thank you to all of you who are here today to attend the webinar and who are interested in the topic of 21st century skills. We hope that this webinar will respect your expectations. I will not spend too much time with introductory remarks, but for those who are not familiar with Talent or who do not know what Talent exactly is, I will just share a few information. Talent stands for Teaching and Learning Educators Network for Transformation. The network, whose secretariat is hosted at UNESCO Dakar, was established in 2016 as part of the efforts to ensure coordination on issues related to education quality within the framework of Education 2030 SDG 4 agenda. As you may have seen in the invitation to the webinar, I am the current coordinator of the Talent Secretariat at UNESCO Dakar. Apart from UNESCO, current members of the Talent Steering Group are ADEA NALA, ANCEFA, Confemen, Education International, UNHCR, UNICEF, REESAO, and some UNESCO institutes such as IAEP Dakar, UIS, and ICBA. Talent is at the same time a working group of the regional coordination of the SDG 4 in Western Central Africa. This is how it was conceived and created, but it also evolved in a sort of regional platform for the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa on issues related to learning assessments and learning outcomes. And since 2016, since its foundation, Talent has worked on different issues related to the teaching and learning process, including teachers' professional standards, learning assessment, and integration of 21st century skills in the teaching and learning process. On this last topic, which is going to be discussed today, Talent and the Brookings Institution, with funding from the GPE, ran a mini-study in 9 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa to identify baseline information about the existence of 21st century skills assessment in these 9 selected countries. For your information, these countries all volunteered and expressed their interest to participate in the study. Following the study, a more in-depth action research has been implemented by Talent and the Brookings Institution in the Gambia, Zambia, and DRC. These 2 projects gave us the opportunity to collect critical information on the status of 21st century skills in the classrooms and to work with teachers and ministry officials in starting a process towards the alignment of curriculum, teacher training, and assessment in order to strengthen learning outcomes and improve learning outcomes. The alignment approach is the approach of Talent in all its activities and actions. We are then here today to share some of the most interesting findings and stimulate the discussion around the skills. This learning series, as you can see, does not appear in a void, but comes from a process that started back in 2018, as I just said. And the learning series is conceived to discuss different aspects of the integration of 21st century skills and increase awareness and stimulate the conversation around all these aspects. Specific objects of today's session are the increasing understanding about different frameworks used by different organizations and jurisdictions over the past 3 decades to define the skills and competencies, to show that teacher preparation is feasible and possible if it is prioritized and understood, to show that adaptation of assessment is viable, that increased awareness of the need for coherence between a focus on the skill, pedagogy, and assessment is crucial. So we hope that all these objectives will be attained by, fulfilled by today's session. And I also wish to thank the country researchers from the 9 countries that participated in the mini-study and that made possible this learning series today. Without them, we would not have any evidence or any sort of input to stimulate this kind of discussion. 2 of those country researchers are with us today, and I'm talking about Mr. Sheikh Nalam from Senegal and Mr. Momodou Dieng from the Gambia, and they will be presenting some of the findings from their own country, as I was saying before. After this little introduction to what talent is and how we arrived to this learning series, let me just introduce and give the floor to our first speaker, Dr. Esther Kerr. Dr. Kerr is a professional fellow at the University of Melbourne in Australia, and she's behind the conception of this learning series. Previously, as senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, she led the Optimizing Assessment for All initiative, and she led the research in collaboration with UNESCO Dakar and Talent. She has most recently engaged in Asia and Africa at national level in assessment of curricular proficiencies and development of 21st century skills assessment. And at the global level, she has worked on surveying student opportunities to acquire a breadth of skills being provided by countries' education systems. So let us start with the first presentation. Over to you, Esther.
Lovely, thank you, Davide. So I'm looking forward to talking to you all. It's lovely to see some familiar faces or familiar names on the chat, as well as hopefully people with whom we'll become familiar over the next couple of webinars. So my first task is to introduce to you a short history of 21st century skills over the last few decades, before we actually look at what's actually happening in some of the countries. So fairly quickly, from the 1980s, we had some seminal reports that were shared by organizations such as the OECD, UNESCO, European Commission, and these were followed by reports from the World Economic Forum and similar. So all of these were looking to what the individual, the citizen, the worker would look like in the 21st century. And in the past 2 decades in particular, we have seen education systems worldwide considering how do we respond to these explicitly stated needs of society for how we need to educate our young people in response to the social, economic, and political conditions that we're seeing. So this in turn has led to a reconsideration of curriculum as well as pedagogical approaches. So with education systems taking many different pathways to integrating new learning goals, there's also been a growing appreciation of how pedagogy, assessment, resourcing, and curriculum are interdependent. So when we change one, we need to start looking at the others. So a question, what are these local and global conditions that are stimulating the change? And here I talk about 2. The first is this idea of a more explicit valuing of what a person can do instead of their formal occupational designation or title. So there's with an acknowledgement that the skills that you can develop in one environment might be equally valued in a totally different working environment. So there's this notion of transfer, of transferability. And the second is this one about complex work environments in which you have the physical and now the digital, the electronic, interacting. And this is where speed of change and changes in demand require flexibility and adaptability. For example, many of you, I think, will have seen some of these studies that have come out of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, over the last few years. And this is just one example, and it is US-based. But what it shows is that over time, and here on the x-axis, you can see from 2000 through to 2011, the share of employment in high skill areas, the blue line, which are non-routine cognitive, and the share in the low skill, the purple line, which is non-routine manual jobs, has been growing. In other words, regardless of whether it's a high education skill type job or a lower level job in terms of education need, if it's non-routine, it's increasing. At the same time, if you look at the red line, the routine occupations have decreased. So what this implies is that across both high and low education need jobs, that capacity to adapt, to be responsive, to make decisions in the moment, all of these are much more highly valued, and we need them more. And if we talk about like non-routine cognitive occupations, might be things like senior officials, managers, technicians, and so on. If we think about routine occupations, they might be some clerical work, some trades work, some plant and machine work. Non-routine manual workers often include a lot of the service areas, service workers, shops, sales, marketing, tourism, and so on. So this is really important because this means that we need to look after all of our children to be able to take on non-routine jobs, not just the high achieving students. So what does this mean for education? It means regardless whether a student is headed toward professional or to manual work, that the traditional modes of education, which have prioritized memorization and rote learning, are now less valuable. So the focus is increasingly on the ability to apply and to use knowledge. So the balance is shifting, and it's shifting toward the competencies that you can see on the right-hand side of this screen. And I'm sorry, I don't have this in French on this, but many of the words are similar. So hopefully you'll pick up on this. Where do we get the competencies from? And so this is my very, very brief zoom through the history of frameworks. And there are many frameworks of these competencies. And there are references at the end of the slides, so you can actually explore them in a bit more detail if you want. So UNESCO's learning to know, learning to do, to be, to live together, that all took on a very humanistic perspective. And that was picked up in the OECD's DESECO report, where there was more detail about what the competencies were that we thought the 21st century citizen would have. But again, it emphasized how we act with tools, act independently, act with others. So there's a message here that I'll come back to later. As we moved into more detail in frameworks developing, there was the ATC 21S consortia, which were mainly academics. That's assessment and teaching of 21st century skills. And then there were regional groups, such as the one that Davide just talked about, but another one in Bangkok, UNESCO's NECMAP cluster. And you can see here two frameworks that again attempt to try to identify what are the sorts of skills, what are the ways we need to think when we think about systems of education. So these start to inform what's happening both globally, regionally, and nationally. So there are several influential frameworks, and they're influential in the sense that they are starting to impact on countries. And I mean, there are people from countries represented in the chat here that have adopted directly from example from Partnerships 21, from P21. So these are all very interesting. One of the big points about this comparison across the frameworks is for you to notice the similarities. I know there are differences, but the similarities are the things that really stand out, that many of us are thinking about very similar things in very different environments. So a big question is, how do we transform those lovely holistic models into educational practice? How do we decide which skills? Do we need frameworks? How do we reflect skills or frameworks across the three big areas shown in this figure? So in this figure, we see a perspective that each of the areas impacts on the other. And more importantly, they all need to reflect the vision that's held by an education system of what competencies and characteristics their students will develop. So, as Davide mentioned in the introduction, the Talent Network has been working precisely on this issue. How do we translate the vision into practice? And the 9 countries in Africa worked together initially to evaluate whether their current subject-based educational assessments touched on 21st century skills. And you can see the 9 countries here, of course. And down in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see a smaller graphic that shows a similar number of countries in Asia which embarked on exactly the same mission. In addition to the 2 sets of 9 countries in the 2 regions, we had a subset of 3 countries in each region, and they worked on development of assessments of just 3 of these 21st century skills. And you'll hear from some of those countries during the webinar series. So that's a very, very quick overview of sort of the background from which we're coming as we move into this webinar series. Here you can see some resources, and the slides will be available for you later, so you can access. Everything is online accessible, so you should find it fairly easily. And the other hope that we have from this seminar series is that you'll do some exploring, not only just maybe read an article, but maybe look at some of the videos that are around and engage in some reflections about when we talk about what's happening in one country, or when we talk about something that's happening regionally, think about what is happening for you and how does it apply. And so there's a couple of points in this slide for you to think about for reflection. And there's also the new IEA study, the 21CS map, that you can have a look at in case your country might be interested in engaging in that study that is going to look at mapping curricula in terms of 21st century skills. So now what we want to do is start looking a little more concretely at some of the implications of what I've said. So we're just going to move into a little poll, and we hope that this works. I've not done it before, so we'll just find out if it goes well. If it doesn't, we can abandon it, but if it does, hopefully it will give us something to think about. So Julien, over to you.
Yeah, let me thank you, Esther. I will, as Esther just said, we don't want you to just listen to us today, but we want we want to engage you in something more active. So we have thought to just pose some live polls, some questions that I will repeat slowly so that the interpreters can translate into French, as unfortunately the Zoom does not allow us to have the poll live in both English and French. So please bear with me if I will speak quite slowly, but this maybe will also give you some time to think about the questions. So the first question is, how valued is knowledge, as in maths, science, social sciences, etc., in your culture? And here you have 3 options: high, medium, or low. The second question, how valued are behaviors, as in acting to help each other, preserve the environment, promote equality in your culture? And again, you have three options: high, medium, or low. Finally, the third question: how valued are 21st century skills, as in problem solving, collaboration, creative thinking, in your culture? Again, the three options are high, medium, or low. I will leave you some time to think about it, and I will just quickly repeat. We're asking you here to give us a sense of how valued are knowledge, behaviors, and 21st century skills in your culture. For the three questions, you have three options: high, which is the one at the high up, exactly; medium, which is the second option; and low, which is the third option on the bottom. I think we can proceed if Esther and Julien are ready to the next set of questions.
Thank you, Davide. Yes, we're ready to move on to the next one. And everybody needs to remember to scroll down so they can see all three questions.
Exactly. Thank you, Esther. So now we're looking at in your country's schools. What proportion of instructional time is given to knowledge in your country's schools? First option, more than 70%. Second option, between 30 and 69%. Third option, less than 30%. Let us go to the second question. What proportion of instructional time is given to nurturing social and civic behavior in your country's schools? Again, first option, more than 70%. Second option, 30 to 69%. Third option, less than 30%. Then let's scroll down to see the third question. What proportion of instructional time is given to 21st century skills in your country's schools? Again, here, the first option is more than 70%. The second option, 30 to 69%. And the third option, less than 30%. So just to repeat and give you some time to think about your answer. Here we are looking at how much time is actually allocated to the study of, to the acquisition of knowledge, nurturing social and civic behavior, and to the acquisition of 21st century skills in your country's schools. I guess that by now you have an idea of where we are, what we want to look at, what the aim of this poll is. So maybe let us have a look at the results, Julien, if it is possible. And I see some comments in the chat. Of course, the digested results will be shareable. And let us have a look now live at the results. So let us quickly have a look at the first question. How valued is knowledge? So the vast majority of participants, 70%, mentioned that knowledge is highly valued in their culture. And this actually corresponds to the instructional time that is given to knowledge in their country's schools. 72% voted for that. There are really just small differences that are not statistically significant. Then let's pass to the second question, which shows us something more interesting, behaviors. So behaviors as acting to help each other, preserve the environment, promote equality in the participants' cultures are between highly and medium valued. But then if we look at the instructional time, more than 50%, actually 54% of the participants voted, said that less than 30% of the instructional time in school is dedicated to nurturing social and civic behavior. So we can see there is a gap there already. And let's pass to the 21st century skills, which is a sort of a topic, which is the main topic of our learning series. Already here we can see that the 21st century skills are highly valued only for the 38% of participants, while 43% of participants said that are medium valued, and only 19% said that are low valued. On the other end, we can clearly see that the proportion of instructional time for the majority of participants to this webinar in their country is less than 30%. So you can see that 58% of participants of this webinar said that less than 30% of instructional time is dedicated to 21st century skills, while at the same time, almost 80%, more than 80% of the participants said that 21st century skills are highly valued or medium valued in their culture. So Esther, what can we say? How can we comment these interesting results?
Hi, Davide. I'm sorry, but I can't see the results. I don't know if other people have seen them. So whatever it is that you're speaking from is not something that I can see.
Okay. So let's ask Julien to share again, because it is clear to me as I have them in front of me.
Everybody else is saying they can.
So I don't know how can we sort it out, but basically,
so maybe since I can't see, if you can continue. If
yes,
you have some
maybe I can continue. Yeah,
later on.
Exactly. Yes. So, but basically, what comes out from here is that knowledge, as we probably expected and we witnessed in most of our research and activities, is highly valued, and enough instructional time, more than 70%, is dedicated to knowledge in country schools. At least, of course, we can't see the difference from country to country, and we can't see the reality of specific context. But let's say that as a general feeling that we're getting from participants, knowledge is highly valued, and enough time is dedicated to the acquisition of knowledge. On the other end, we can see there is a mismatch, a clear mismatch between the value that is allocated to behaviors and to 21st century skills, and the instructional time that is actually allocated in country schools. This is particularly for both, I would say that for both behaviors and 21st century skills, numbers are really, really similar. 54% of the respondents said that less than 30% of the time in their country is given to nurturing social and civic behavior, while 58% of the respondents said that less than 30% of instructional time is given to 21st century skills in their country schools, while more than 80% for 21st century skills said that those skills are highly or medium valued in their culture. And for behaviors, this number is even higher, as almost 90% of the respondents said that these behaviors are highly or medium valued. So this is something maybe that participant can start thinking about and then can reflect. And later on, we will come back to some of the function that we have took into account to stimulate debate throughout this learning series. There will be a Slack, and we encourage all of you to access it and pose questions or reflections. And we hope that also these results can kind of stimulate some debate among you, And actually, we wish that during these next few weeks, in the Slack discussion, you will also have time to speak a little bit more in details about the situation in your specific countries, so that we'll have a clearer idea if there are differences between a country or another. Surely we can see that something that is also interesting is that 9% of the participants said that proportion of instructional time given to 21st century skills in their country is more than 70%. So I think these examples could really come out during the next few weeks, and we can see more in details what are these countries and how this has been implemented. So if we're fine with the poll, and I don't know, Esther, if you had access to this slide. If not, we can share it with you later. Let us go to the next session in the interest of time, and let me invite Mr. Mamadou Dieng, Director of Science and Technology Education and Head of the In-Service Education and Training Unit at the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education in the Gambia. The director will tell us about the Gambia's experience in the meaning study, focusing particularly on teaching and teacher training issues and curriculum development. So over to you, Mr. Dieng, and I'll get back later.
Thank you very much, Davide, and good morning to you all, especially participants who are in the same time zone as that of the Gambia. So other participants, it might be afternoon in their countries or evening. So whatever the time difference, I salute you all. The Gambia participated in the mini study as indicated in the introduction. But my presentation here today would be to give you a synopsis on Gambia's approach to curriculum development and teacher training. The national curriculum in the Gambia draws its inspiration from national priorities and makes reference to documents such as the National Development Plan of the Gambia, Education Policy 2016-2030, Poverty Reduction Strategy papers, and feedback from wide stakeholder consultations. The curriculum is aligned to also regional and international standards, such as the ECOWAS protocols, the Sustainable Development Goals. The national curriculum documents includes curriculum framework, syllabuses, pupils' books, and teachers' guides. The ministry's mission statement is that we intend to provide a responsive, relevant, and quality education for all, so that Gambian children will be equipped with skills which will make them fully functioning members of society and be able to contribute to the success and development of the country. And of course, in the current policy, education policy, among the aims of that policy is to encourage creativity and the development of critical and analytical skills among learners, and the development of skills such as problem solving, critical thinking, decision making, life health practices, and the spirit of teamwork. If you look at those statements in curriculum materials and education policy, you will realize that there is clear intention to promote the development of 21st century skills in the curriculum. However, a comprehensive definition of these skills and how they could be integrated into the curriculum materials, the teaching pedagogy, as well as the assessment system have not been suggested in the curriculum framework. And consequently, these skills are randomly mainstreamed in various curriculum materials in cross-curricular manner. And hence, the teachers lack required skills to transform these concepts around 21st century skills in effective daily classroom practices and classroom-based assessment. And this signals the lack of proper alignment between the taught curriculum, the intended curriculum, and assessment practices. The education system also places high premium on passing exam for transition and selection. And of course, this dominant pedagogy, therefore, is to teach. The dominant pedagogy aligned to this thinking is teach to enable learning and then assess to ascertain how much learning has taken place. Thus, you will realize that the proper integration of 21st century skills will require a paradigm shift and continuous professional development for teachers. This was why, and what will the training, continuous professional training of teachers focus on? It should focus on paradigm shift from assessment for normative base to assessment that gives opportunity for feedback and feed forward. Most of the assessment that are currently conducted in the country, especially the classroom-based assessment, is more of summative. You want to ascertain how much is learned, but how do you use that feedback, to inform you about whether you need to change pedagogy, whether you need to change material? That is something that needs to be strengthened. There should also be a shift from traditional direct and recall types of questions to a more complex form that will evoke the hidden potentials of learners. You realize that most of these learners have, range of potentials, but the types of assessment that are only, requiring students to try to recall what they have learned is not giving chance for learners to exhibit this other potential. The shift should also be, how do you detect 21st century skills and soft skills when they are manifested during the course of learning or assessment? The training should also focus on how teachers can assess and report on the skills in the classroom-based assessment. That means the shift will not only be on pedagogy, but the shift should be even at the level of schools, the way they view and report on assessment. If teachers are only required to be giving assessment that are just reporting test scores, are not interested in looking at is somebody exhibiting some skills that are related to 21st century skills, and how do you spot it? How do you report on that? Then you will realize that the assessment type that are currently being practiced in schools need some changes. There should also be a focus on teachers to understand the process in building the right and suitable pedagogical approach for the introduction and integration of 21st century in daily classroom teaching and learning processes. In the Gambia, when we participated in the study, we realized that when you talk to teachers, they know about, they can tell you about skills that are really regarded as 21st century skills, because they would talk to you that they intend to incorporate, problem solving, critical thinking, analysis, But in practice, you will realize that some of them do not understand what these major skills are and the soft skills and how do they manifest or how are they being assessed in the class. Quite often they would give you examples of how problem solving related to mathematics as a subject, you know, is taught or is assessed in the class. So introducing teachers to 21st century skills step by step in a step-by-step guide for item design, development, and in administration and scoring reporting. Therefore, is a vital focus for any training that these teachers will need. The teacher training in the Gambia is conducted in different forms, pre-service and in-service teacher training or professional development. In some contexts, they will call it teacher professional development. But in the Gambia, we have a draft teacher professional development index of competences, which specifies, you know, 4 levels of teacher careers. This is being currently tried at Gambia College. It's a draft, but Gambia College being one of the institutes that you know, primarily training our teachers. These competencies have 4 different levels. Level 1, the foundation, which is the student teacher. In level 2, the core teacher or the new teacher who has just, you know, moved from phase 1 as being a teacher trainee to a newly graduate teacher. And level 3 is the proficient teacher. We regard them as senior teachers. And level 4 is the head teacher, you know. So this framework is good because the teacher professional index of competencies are meant to enhance teacher professionalism by making clear the expectation for each competency level of their careers. Teachers receive training at certificate, diploma, degree levels from Gambia College, Gambia Technical Training Institute, and the University of the Gambia, among other tertiary institutions. At the level of the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education, there is these various units like the INSET unit, which is charged with the responsibility to coordinate professional development programs of teachers. And to do this, they do conduct training needs of teachers and develop courses or content based on this feedback on the training need assessment. You also have specialist units like the assessment unit of the ministry, which is also a unit that looks at how teachers can be supported in developing assessment items, assessment instruments, and really conducting formative classroom-based assessment. So the unit is also looking at how to develop models and organize training workshops or seminars for teachers. For example, when we participated in the mini study on these 21st century skills, we actually engaged these 2 units, the assessment unit and the INSET unit. And at some stage in the pilot, we also engaged Gambia College. And on the 14th of May 2019, these units organized a day-long training session for 12 teachers who were participating in the pilot. And the training was meant to expose them to the 21st Century Skills Initiative, as well as another training, which was a 2-day training held on the 7th and 15th of June 2019 for the same cohort of teachers, because these teachers were the pilot teachers and they were drawn from 4 schools in region 1 and 2. So they were giving another round of training, which was meant to help them develop skills around how do they adapt their classroom-based assessment tools that they are currently using to tweak those tools to capture 21st century skills. And below you can see the training sessions we had with those teachers. But basically, like most participants have already indicated, you will realize that in the Gambia as well, we have in our curriculum statements and policy documents advocating for those same skills: problem solving, analytical skills, critical thinking. That's one thing in documents, but in practice at the level of the classrooms, you see a big gap in teachers trying to figure out how these skills can be taught, how can they be assessed, how do you detect when the skills are manifested by the students, but more challengingly, how do you report on those skills? Because if the focus of assessment, the summative assessment, primarily give weighting and premium to who is able to pass the recall type of questions for the purpose of promotion and selection, then there needs to be paradigm shift, not only in terms of teacher training, curriculum, material development, but a host of thinking around education in the Gambia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director. We're kind of running out of time, so I will just remind everyone that if you have any question, just write them down in the chat, and we will try to answer to some of them later at the end after the next 2 presentations, or we will answer to other ones in the week. Let me introduce Mr. Sheikh Nalam, Director of Planning and Educational Reform at the Ministry of National Education in Senegal. Mr. Lam was part of the research team. He led the research team on 21st century skills in 2018-19, and he will speak about Senegal's experience in this field. Mr. Lam, over to you.
Bonjour à tout le monde.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, David. I would first of all like to greet Mr. Director Songa and David, the coordinator, Estelle and Mungu. And I also would like to greet all the participants from all countries. And I would like to seize this opportunity to basically thank everyone who's taken out time to attend the session. I also would like to say that Senegal is extremely glad to share its experience and its example with regards to supporting talent on the mini study that was carried out in the country on the development of 21st century skills. So this is the presentation plan. We are first of all going to recall the objectives of the mini study. Some of them have already been described by Estelle in her presentation, but we're just going to quickly remind you. And we also will see what were the contextual objectives specific to Senegal. We are then going to talk about results and the main findings that we could draw. We will then look at the interest for the country, so what Senegal has been able to draw. And then we're going to look at the perspectives that open up. Now, with regards to the general objectives of the study, it was basically to take stock of the take off the situation of the inclusion of 21st century skills in evaluation and assessment systems. And with regards to specific objectives of the study, we wanted to develop a description of the Senegalese education system. We also wanted to draw up a description of assessment mechanisms. We wanted to collect and analyze tests and exams at various levels, whether it's at the level of the school, at the local level, or the national level. So in the we also wanted to code the tools collected and analyze the degree of inclusion of 21st century skills in assessments. Now, this is an extremely important moment for us because it really helped all the teams to be supported by the Brooklands team and the talent group. And last but not the least, study the modalities of integrating 21st century skills in the national systems. Now, after this study, we achieved the following results and the following findings. First of all, so we realized that the overall vision of the 21st century skills is reflected in the strategic documents. I forgot to activate the video. So we realized that the overall vision of the 21st century skills is reflected in the strategic documents, whether it's in the general policy letter and the planning document. So after the study, when we carried out an analysis, we looked at all the documents, all the planning documents, evaluation documents, teaching documents, and we realized that these skills have not been explicitly identified in the official curriculum. The mini study identified assessment approaches that, although not developed to explicitly target 21st century skills, trigger some of the processes that are related to them. We realized that since our official curriculum is based on the competence, but we have capacity building on techniques for coding and in identifying targeted skills were a crucial step in the transition to explicit focus on 21st century skills. Both teachers and technicians, but while planning this skills, were not explicitly targeting 21st century skills. And it's the study that helped us gain realization. So you have capacity building on techniques for coding and identifying targeted skills was a crucial step in the transition to an explicit focus on 21st century skills, because we had technical departments, we had schools, we had teachers participating, and all the stakeholders who participated in this study, when they targeted their training on the skills, were able to realize on the value of such skills. So we could basically we could formalize these skills and explicit them in the teaching methods. Now, what are the prospects of use for the 21st century skills for our country, the interest for the country? The study enabled technicians from the ministry key structures, the pedagogical departments, the technical departments, and we also had the general inspection in charge of developing the course. It really helped all the officials of the ministry to benefit from a refresher course thanks to the various training workshops on the 21st century skills. So it also helped them to be better equipped with techniques for sorting and coding exercises and with tools that were made available, because these were tools that were very well developed and that helped us to basically continue with exercises and look at these skills that are evaluated. It also helped us have a critical reading on the existing planning and evaluation tools in light of these new skills. And it also helped us to be more aware of the need to restructure curricular documents of the country, learning materials and assessment tools in order to better factor in the 21st century skills, which are the basis of the skills required for the life of the modern citizen. So it's actually an opportunity for us, at least in the midterm, within our within the framework of our projects, to basically identify the existing skills, because there are skills that do exist and we weren't aware that these skills existed. And we also had the opportunity to carry out a curricular reform and explicit these skills, not only in the policy documents, like in the policy letter and the sector documents, and also in the teaching training programs, and also the curricular programs, and help them explicit them in the assessment manuals and the teaching material. Now, with regards to the prospects, we could actually carry out the reforms. We could do capacity building for stakeholders at all levels on issues related to 21st century skills, whether they are policymakers, education managers, curriculum developers, teachers, parents, evaluators, because we basically updated our curriculum that involved everyone. So we could integrate these 21st century skills into the curriculum, and we raised awareness on the relevance of for meaningful learning and adapted to the current needs. Because it's about training stakeholders to work in a specific context. Another prospect is the systematic factoring in of the 21st century skills during the next revision of the curriculum. Now, PARC is a project of unified curriculum. It's about reviewing the curriculum after 10 years of application. So this is a key moment for us. We're going to move towards a second generation of curriculum, and we're going to seize the opportunity to better integrate, better mainstream these 21st century skills into the new curriculum. So this would be the second phase of the curriculum. Now, we're also going to review the teaching tools, because once it has been implemented, we really need to make sure that these 21st century skills are basically explicited in all the teaching tools. So it's about updating manuals, the student textbooks, teacher pedagogical guides, and also the evaluation documents, so that all documents on all skills on the 21st century are better mainstreamed. So these have to be highlighted in the policy documents and also integrated and mainstreamed into the teaching tools. And we also wanted to upgrade the performance monitoring and certification system for a greater awareness of the 21st century skills. So whether we're talking of policy documents or whether we're talking of teaching tools or assessment manuals for at various levels. So we really must make sure that the 21st century skills are properly integrated. So these are the 4 prospects which are quite ambitious, but which is extremely important for our country, because our participation in this project has basically made us realize it struck a chord, and we're really now aware of the value of these 21st century skills. And it has really pushed us to basically change certain things. So we really need to make certain things more explicit in the policy documents and the other documents. So this is what I wanted to share with all the participants. So it's a country experience and it's a country example, and we've been able to participate in this, for which we're truly thankful.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Lam, Monsieur le Directeur. We will go straight into the next presentation from Esther, as we don't have.
Thank you very much.
Please.
Great. Hi there. I hope you can see what I expect and mean you to see. So having heard from our colleagues in Senegal and the Gambia, I want us to focus on what we know and what we're challenged by. And there are many things. So in our work in Africa and Asia, we've taken the approach of exploring and stimulating the integration of 21st century skills through the lens of assessment, as you've heard from Monsieur Lam. So, and publications from all these studies are available. I've seen there's questions about the on the chat, and you can download those. Now, although there are many negative examples of using assessment as drivers in education, there's no doubt that assessment can be a really positive influence. And so for the national teams of educators across the participating countries in the talent work, this focus on assessment meant that we had to understand what the skills were actually about. So just as when you teach, for example, geography, you need to understand, how rivers and mountains form. So with 21st century skills, you need to understand what's inside those terms, what they mean in practice, and how you expect the skills to develop and to mature. So the first step for the national teams was to identify which skills their countries valued before being able to move into understanding more about their nature. Now, have a look at these. It's fascinating. The top cluster of skills in English and in French, they're derived from the 9 national teams in Africa, and the bottom from the national teams in Asia. The size of the words indicates the frequency of their endorsement by the countries. So you can see which of the skills were most valued across the country groups, across the regions. So, although it's fascinating to look at differences, it's even more fascinating to look at the similarities. We often think that we are so different. It's reassuring to see that in some ways we share many values. So anyway, this was sort of the background for a lot of the work that we started moving on. Note, however, even though we've got a lot of similarity in aspirations, putting them into practice is another matter altogether. So this chart is taken from a study which is just being published today. So it's a happy coincidence. And here, across 22 jurisdictions, they're mainly countries, but there's a couple of states, we looked at the degree to which 21st century skills were actually embedded into the delivered curriculum. And this comes back to the reality or the application that some people have asked about on the chat. The 21st century skills here were divided across 3 categories. We had skills, what we've called a cluster of character, and meta-learning on that x-axis. The bars you can see indicate the degree or the depth to which there is real adoption of the skills. So for example, the red shows that a particular skill, we'll say creativity, which is the first one, is mostly just included within one subject area. The orange part of the bars show whether the skill is reflected across discipline areas, so more multidisciplinary, while the green shows whether the curriculum is explicit about how the skill might develop or progress or mature. So the minimal degree to which we get the green, i.e. progression, shows that there's a lot of very surface level work being done. So we've got a really long way to go, and that's a big challenge. If we don't understand how a skill like creativity or critical thinking develops and matures, then we can't integrate it into curriculum. We can't teach it and we can't assess it. So the idea of having developmental frameworks behind the skills is very, very important. Teachers, of course, need developmental frameworks if they're going to move through a curriculum, if they're going to keep developing, nurturing and enhancing the skills in students. The teachers also need to understand what that developmental progression is if they're going to monitor student learning, if they're going to identify where a student is currently functioning and where that student can move to next. So one of the big issues for us is that understanding this, how skills progress, we're still in the infancy. So this is a really big challenge for us. We understand how literacy and numeracy develop. These skills, quite a few of them, we don't have the same understanding yet. So listing skills as aspirations is not enough. And that's why we had 3 national teams in Africa and also in Asia spending a huge amount of time discussing, arguing, negotiating to reach common understandings and definitions of the skills before we were able to start on that challenge of designing the assessments and thinking about teaching. So here, I've just given one quick illustration of how we might look at the structure of a skill. This one, of course, is problem solving. And what you can see here on the left-hand side of each of the tables is the main strand, the major cognitive processes that we look at. And then we can look at the sub-skills within each of those strands and then sub-skills. So again, if we go back to that geography example, not only do you want to know about the mountains and rivers, you need to understand about the soil and the growth. And it's the same with skills. We need to understand right down to the itty bitty grain at the bottom so that we can understand how we can nurture them through normal classroom tasks and embedded within curriculum. And embedding within curriculum, of course, is something that we'll talk about a great deal more in the next webinar. But we need these structures of skills if we're going to work with them. So if we want to integrate 21st century skills into opportunities to learn that will be provided by our education systems, first, we need to understand the nature of the skills, how it's structured, and how it progresses. Then we can start looking at how do we embed and integrate this into curriculum. And there are many different models of how that can be done, and we'll look at some of those next time. And then once we have got an idea of the curricular progression, we can start looking at how can we support that through designing appropriate assessment tasks, using appropriate pedagogical techniques, and making sure that we've got resources that actually enhance that rather than moving us back to rote learning or memorization. So I hope that gives you a very quick overview of where the process goes, and we'll show you some more highlights from that next time. So thank you for your attention. You can see some of the resources here, and again, they're in the online forum space so that you can pick up on different parts of this and increase your understanding or knowledge, as well as raise questions and possibly raise some disagreements. There's no right way here. We're all exploring a new way to go in our education space. And here are some explorations that you might like to follow up as well. Some of these are resources, but also they might make you think a little bit in different ways. And I'll leave you on this slide. Right at the beginning, we looked at those US trends about the workforce, and that's all very well, you know, that's the US, but most of us don't live in the US, and the US is not relevant in our education experiences, all those of our children. So you might like to think about how similar are the trends and patterns in workforce in your country, and what implications might that have for how your education systems are responding. So thank you, and I'll hand you back to Davide.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you very much. I don't know, Lynn, if we have time for taking one or two questions quickly. I saw a lot of participants pose a lot of interesting questions. Maybe let's just have one question for Esther. To what extent is human-centered design or a participatory approach used in creating 21st century skills framework? And how is this extent measured? I don't know if this is a very interesting question. Maybe you want to take that one?
No, I don't really, because that one's too difficult for me.
It is a very difficult question, yeah.
No, thank you. I mean, it's a very interesting question. It's not something that I've thought about. I think that if we look at most of the frameworks, well, probably, yeah, most of them, they're typically brought to fruition through collaborative processes. But in terms of the specificity of your question, I don't know the answer at all. So if you can make sure you post that question, it'd be something that we would really like to follow up. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there are some interesting examples, and maybe the CogLab video can, in a certain sense, help, or not respond, but give some hints to this question. So I think, unfortunately, we don't have time for more additional questions. I know there are a lot of questions that have not been responded, some of them for the Senegal, some of them for the Gambia. And I invite you, all of you, to access the Slack. And the link was just sent by my colleague Lynn, and pose all your questions and reflections there. And we will try to address all of them over the course of the next 2 weeks. This is not the end of the learning series, it's just the beginning. I hope you had some interesting thoughts, and there are some reflections that are going to nurture the dialogue over the next month. So I really encourage you to access the Slack, pose your questions, and make some reflections. And I thank Esther for the last interesting reflections on the nature and of work and how this is evolving in all of the countries. I think this will help us really in going forward with this discussion. I want to thank again Mr. Mamadou Dieng and Mr. Sheikh Nalam for their time, their interesting presentation, and the sharing of their experience. Finally, I want to thank also Lynn, Julian, and all the IEP colleagues who have made this webinar possible. Just one last announcement. The next webinar will be on November 5th at 10 a.m. Dakar, or 11 a.m. Paris, depending on where you are. And I saw there are people are located in Australia and Asia, so they are on different times. But let's use 10 a.m. Dakar for the next webinar on November 5th. You will receive the link soon. Please go and have a look at all the resources that are in the shared space, and let's continue the discussion on the Slack. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you all today. Bye.